Welcome back to Philosophy and Ethics in Games, the series where I break down the stories in some of our favorite games and ask the tough questions to figure out what is right and what is wrong. I'm Josh Bearheart Hawk, and today we're continuing our vigilante ways in Episode 2 of Telltale Games Batman. In case you missed any of the previous episodes in the Philosophy and Ethics series, I've linked a playlist in the description below. As I continue to break down this and other games, I'll add new videos to the playlist so you can find them all in one place. As Episode 1 drew to a close, Bruce was confronted with the harsh reality that his father might not have been the upstanding citizen he'd always imagined him to be. Falcone admitted to Batman that the family behind a lot of the criminal activity in Gotham was the Waynes, and as Episode 2, titled Children of Arkham, gets underway, we can find Bruce standing over the memorial plaque that was apparently placed to honor his parents in the spot they fell. Before too long, Alfred shows up, and Bruce has the chance to confront him for hiding the truth, getting a few answers in the process, and opening up a topic that will be pervasive throughout the remainder of the game. The concept of the sins of the father becoming the sins of the son goes back millennia, and is often rooted in religious concepts. The idea of original sin, as laid out in the Christian Bible for instance, illustrates how the actions of parents like Adam and Eve can ripple through generations. But the meaning goes far deeper than religion, and has some merit in the world that we live in. Children watch their parents closely as they grow, and many of them wind up emulating the behavior of their parents when they become adults themselves. Ideally, this would be mirroring positive behaviors like hard work and treating others with respect and care, but it also leads to carrying less ideal behaviors from one generation to the next. It's likely that you, or someone you know for instance, grew up in a broken household, where one or both parents was an alcoholic or was abusive, and as an adult, the child who went through those horrific experiences sometimes winds up becoming just like the parents that they maybe even hated. The cycle repeats with each new generation, and even though some manage to break free of it, many still fall victim to making the same mistakes that they watched their parents making for years. In Bruce's case, however, the issue wasn't abuse. It was having a father who victimized other people and brought unnecessary pain in order to grow his wealth and power. We'll find out in later episodes that he worked alongside Falcone and Mayor Hill to rule Gotham with an iron fist, using his position as a doctor to have people drugged and locked up in Arkham Asylum when they got in the way of the three mob bosses, and the question of original sin falls right into our lap. How much liability does Bruce have for the actions of his family before he was even old enough to know what was happening? If his family fortune, the money, wealth, and the name handed down to him by his father, was accrued using immoral or illegal activities, does he owe something to Gotham as retribution for the crimes of his father? It's not an easy question to answer, and it gets to the idea of fairness in the systems that prop up our society, and brings into question the idea of handing down wealth to begin with. The first and most obvious question here is whether any one person or family should even have the kind of wealth that the Waynes have managed to accrue. At first glance, the impulse might be to say that they earned it and were therefore entitled to it, but in reality, you don't earn billions of dollars working a regular job. You can't just work a 9-to-5 and expect to become a billionaire. That kind of wealth only comes from stepping on the backs of others and using less than ethical means, and once you get to a certain point, you basically become untouchable. Take any billionaire and look closely at how they managed to become that wealthy, and you'll find that, at best, they were unethical and used manipulation tactics that most of us would find, to use the most apt term, icky, to grow their wealth, and at worst, they did things that were outright illegal. Sometimes the people who used illegal methods get caught and lose everything, a la Bernie Madoff, but that isn't always the case. In Batman, Thomas Wayne got away with his crimes because he had Mayor Hill on his side, though they did kind of catch up to him in the end in that alleyway near the theater. During his trip down memory lane, Bruce remembers his father mentioning Falcone in his dying breath. And as the crime boss is conveniently locked up at the GCPD, it's just a matter of going downtown to ask the man a few questions about his involvement in Thomas's murder. Questioning him is easy enough, though the conversation doesn't net Bruce nearly as much information as he'd hoped because it's interrupted by a police officer named Renee Montoya who walks in and opens fire on the old gangster, ending his life just as the story is getting good. That seems like a shocking thing on its own, but it gets even more shocking when you realize that both the chief of police and the DA running for mayor are standing at the door and just let her walk in with no resistance. This is kind of a nitpicky point, I know, but I cannot help but wonder how in the world anyone, even a police officer, would have been able to just walk into the room where the highest profile gangster in Gotham was being held with no one stopping them. This just seems like one of those situations where you would only allow a small list of individuals in or out as a security precaution. Lord knows Falcone has a laundry list of enemies, and with the corruption in Gotham going all the way up to the mayor's office, it just seems so wild that the security would be so loose. I mean, okay, Bruce shouldn't have been there either, especially given the recent news about his father potentially being linked to organized crime and Falcone in particular, but at least that kind of makes some sense, as it's not very likely someone as high profile as Bruce Wayne would be doing anything that brazen. Mob hits are generally carried out by lower-level enforcers who keep a low profile to protect the family and themselves, so you would think that Officer Montoya would have been stopped at the door just in case. That being said, she was drugged, and while that means that she probably shouldn't be held accountable for her actions as she had no control over herself, it also means that someone else was able to get into the precinct, put a needle in her neck without anyone noticing, and point her in the direction of Falcone to carry out the deed. Oh yeah, and Gordon and Harvey Dent leave Bruce alone with Montoya in the interrogation room, and I was legit pulling out my hair because he has no business being in that room, let alone being left alone with a suspect. It's no wonder Gotham is in shambles. Even without blatant corruption, they've got an incompetent chief of police and district attorney. You can't just leave unauthorized individuals alone with a suspect in custody, no matter how rich they are or how much they've given to your campaign. At a minimum, there should be an officer or two in there to guard her, and Bruce should have been taken to another room to get his witness statement before being sent home. When he finally does leave, he winds up running into Vicky Vale, the reporter from the newspaper that he can't seem to shake. She's asking for some kind of inside details, and while talking to her isn't exactly the best thing to do here, I kind of wanted to see what would happen if I told her the truth about who shot Falcone. But it turns out that never really comes up again, at least not in any way that I noticed. Intrepid reporters aside, Bruce goes back to the Batcave to do some more digging, and as he does that, we can talk about Falcone's murder for a moment, because Alfred brings it up and Bruce has a couple of possible replies. There's nothing in particular that hinges on the response, but it is rather interesting to contemplate because when someone has hurt as many people as Falcone did, there are a number of different feelings that people might have about him being taken out so brutally. On the one hand, he never had a day in court, and there are likely people out there who would have preferred to see him in front of a jury, as trials can bring closure to some. For some people, a sense of justice being served is centered on the time where grievances can be aired and where the accused can face the people they hurt. It can be cathartic to look the person who hurt you or someone you love in the eye and tell them how much pain they caused, and to see the look on their face when a guilty verdict is read out. On the other hand, that can all kind of go away if the person is able to slip out through a plea deal or a non-guilty verdict with either a hung jury or a straight-up not guilty vote. Our system of justice, for all its flaws, relies on people going to trial, though, and the ability of the prosecution to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that a person is guilty before they have to face the penalty for their crimes. As tough as that might be to swallow, especially in a case where someone like Falcone is concerned, it falls right in line with the idea that we talked about in the first episode, where the goal is to protect the innocent. Let's pretend for a moment that Montoya wasn't drugged and had decided on her own to take a page from Batman's book and dish out justice. It isn't that far-fetched of an idea, as she even mentions to Bruce in the hallway as he's making his way to Falcone's room that she's worried he's going to get off scot-free, as men like him always seem to do. So she makes her way in and shoots him, being of sound mind and whatnot, and when the news breaks, the public is excited to see someone they all just knew was corrupt go down. That excitement leads to others getting the idea of taking justice into their own hands, and at some point there is a killing that isn't quite as popular. Perhaps it's a public figure who was overall popular but had hurt the wrong person, or someone who didn't really have a public spotlight but that a small group of people, or even just one individual, knew had done something wrong, even when there was no evidence of that person doing anything to hurt anyone. This kind of system is unsustainable, so we had to agree on some kind of process that would formalize determining a person's guilt and what would happen to them if they were shown to be guilty. The process hasn't always gotten things right, and there have been many innocent people jailed and even executed, while the guilty sometimes go free. But generally speaking, it's a good starting point. Not everyone agrees with that way of doing things, however, and one of the people wanting to see things become a little more anarchistic is Oswald Cobblepot. Bruce met up with Cobblepot in the first episode, but I left him more or less out of the discussion at that point because his part in the story is actually rather minor in the grand scheme of things. Batman meets up with him in this episode at the top of the Skyline Club, where Falcone had been hiding at the end of episode 1, and the pair have a short discussion where it's revealed Cobblepot was behind the drugging of Officer Montoya and the assassination of Falcone. From that angle, it sounds like Cobblepot is the brains behind the operation, but we'll find out later on that he's merely a puppet in Lady Arkham's show, and while he is dangerous in his own way, he's also a pretty standard villain, all things considered. Batman is left to deal with one of Cobblepot's more violent thugs, and after a short fight, he has to make his way, as Bruce, to a bar where Selina Kyle, aka Catwoman, is hanging out as Cobblepot is targeting her now for her failure to deliver the plans that Batman stole in episode 1. There's honestly just so many layers here, and I can't properly do the whole story justice, but one thing to note is that none of these characters are as simple as they seem at times. Cobblepot has become who he is thanks to the actions of Thomas Wayne, and while many of the actions he takes could be plainly labeled as wrong, his motivations center on righting the wrongs of the past and putting together his own ideal future. Catwoman is a thief who has her own motivations and actually seems to have a sort of code at times that she sticks to, for better or worse. And Batman is morally gray at best and tends to live by his own rules while also wanting a better future for Gotham in general. And that's one of those things that really pulled me into this game the further I went along, and I've got to give props to Telltale here, as they did a really good job with the nuance in each character's story. There's some, like Falcone, Thomas Wayne, and Mayor Hill, that could be called unethical with very little wiggle room. But the main players in the story, like Cobblepot, Lady Arkham, Harvey Dent, Catwoman, and even Batman himself, are all a lot deeper than they appear to be at first glance. But the meeting with Cobblepot and subsequent bar fight at Selina's side wind up being the least of Bruce's worries, as he's able to decrypt a phone one of Cobblepot's goons was using, discovering a voicemail that leads to an appointment with the mayor. Mayor Hill has been mostly a background character to this point, only living in the conversations about how corrupt he is. But as we approach the end of the episode, he takes center stage, literally and figuratively. Bruce has to decide to visit Mayor Hill, either as himself or Batman, to get some answers, as it seems that he's been leaking information about the Wayne family to someone on Cobblepot's crew. And I wound up keeping the suit and tie for this occasion, as the Batman card should really be a last resort. If Bruce can get Mayor Hill talking, why bother putting on the cowl and exposing himself to any number of possible problems? The one hang-up I had about going as Bruce was the fact that Bruce is funding the campaign of the person opposing Mayor Hill in the upcoming election, and a closed-door meeting with the mayor could be a worse look publicly than the meeting with Falcone was. That sort of thing is the fuel that runs conspiracy theories worldwide, and it could have been an interesting storyline if Mayor Hill wound up winning unexpectedly after meeting with Bruce in private. This meeting, in and of itself, is good for getting some more backstory on the Waynes and their role in the downfall of Gotham as a whole, but the far more interesting point I want to focus on here is the choice that Bruce is given to say that he'll stop funding Harvey Dent's campaign or refuse what amounts to a bribe or blackmail of sorts. Hill says that he'll tell Bruce all about his family's history if he accepts, and to me, the choice here that makes the most sense is to agree to the conditions with no real intention of following through. Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire, and with how crooked Hill has been and the amount of pain he's wrought in Gotham, having the chance to pull one over on him is something I can't turn down. To be fair, I didn't really expect this decision to have much weight overall, but in a real-life situation, it could be easily argued that the right thing to do would be to play along in the moment and pull the rug out from under Hill's feet later by continuing to fund Harvey Dent's campaign. It's also a bit wild to me that Hill would open up as much as he does with Bruce here, as that one promise gets him to spill his guts on how he, Thomas Wayne, and Falcone used Arkham Asylum to get rid of the people who refused to work with them. They'd drug people, and Thomas would use his medical connections to get them locked up and labeled as insane. So, yeah, they did some pretty messed up stuff. But just to reiterate, Mayor Hill spills all of this to Bruce Wayne, the billionaire in charge of a giant tech company who could easily have listening devices and has already in this very meeting demonstrated his ability to hack into things. That is a level of incompetence that would land him on one of those countdowns where they list the dumbest criminals of the year. None of that really matters though, as Mayor Hill and Harvey Dent are squaring off in a mayoral debate that very evening, and only one of them will be walking out of it. Catwoman shows up to help, and she and Batman wind up having to take out a bunch of Cobblepot's men, as Cobblepot himself takes to the debate stage, shooting the moderator and forcing both Hill and Harvey Dent to tell the truth about their plans for the city by injecting them with a variant of the drug that he used to make Montoya kill Falcone. This is also where we're introduced to Lady Arkham, as a masked figure takes over the broadcast of the debate to tell everyone how the children of Arkham are going to expose the corruption in the city and make everything better. Now, while I don't condone the actions of the children of Arkham, I do have to say here that the idea of candidates in a debate being forced to debate after some kind of truth serum was administered is intriguing. Just imagine how much more informative and entertaining those things would be if the politicians on stage had to be completely honest. But I digress. A video of Thomas Wayne drugging and sending Oswald Cobblepot's mother, Esther, to Arkham plays before all hell breaks loose. Cops come pouring in, people try to escape the theater in a panic, and Mayor Hill winds up being shot before Batman has to make the final big choice of the episode to either save Catwoman or Harvey Dent. To me, this was a no-brainer. Catwoman has shown that she can take care of herself, and Harvey seems just a wee bit more vulnerable. And running over to save Harvey shows me that I made the right choice, as Selina manages to mostly kick the asses of her attackers, even though one gets a shot off and wounds her before Batman jumps in to help and she gets away. As the episode comes to an end, we're left wondering what's next, and who the Lady of Arkham could possibly be. Some of those questions will be answered next week, and even as out of control as this episode was at times, the train is about to go completely off the rails. To make sure you don't miss out on that, hit the like button on this video and subscribe to Lost in Games on YouTube. New philosophy and ethics videos drop every Thursday, and I've got a couple of other great series like Friend or Foe and Unscripted to check out as well. If you want to help the channel out in other ways, I've got channel memberships and a Patreon, where chipping in a couple bucks a month helps me to get new games to cover while getting you perks like having your name on the screen in videos and early access. That's all I've got for now. I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
We are the children of Arkham, and we have opened your eyes.